Here we go. It is special coverage. Gary Apple inside our SNY studios alongside Todd Zeeland, our SNY MLB insider. It's Andy Martino as the Mets are getting set to introduce David Stearns as their new president of baseball operations. That is a new title inside the organization. And Stearns, 38 years old, a New York native from the Upper East Side, is the man for the job. Let's begin right there, Andy. We're going to take you out to the news conference as soon as it gets underway. But why David Stearns? Why is he the right guy for this job?
Well, ever since Steve Cohen came in, Gary, with Standy Alderson, with the new ownership group, he was very clear that he wanted to hire a president of baseball operations. So that's really where it starts, is that he never wavered from that goal. Why David Stearns specifically? Well, there were a number of other highly regarded executives that Cohen was interested in over the years, whether it was Farhan Zaidi in San Francisco or some others that are kind of billed. And I guess we're going to hear from David Stearns to tell us a little bit about himself right now.
Yes, indeed. Let's go out to the news conference. We head for Citi Field right now.
You know, before I introduce David officially, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, obviously what transpired with Buck. And, you know, just want to make clear that I kind of orchestrated all of this. I wanted to, I wanted to, you know, handle Buck in a way, the way he wanted to be. He wanted to go down, and then obviously, you know, with David on Monday. And then you have the MLB playoffs coming up. And so the window of opportunity to do this was kind of short. And so, you know, that's how we did it. And, you know, I obviously appreciate all that Buck did for the organization and for me. And so that's that. And so now I'm here to introduce, you know, David Stearns, our president of baseball operations. I'm really excited by this. It's, you know, I've been really patient, looking for the right person. As Dave and I got to know each other, I mean, you know, it's clear that we're aligned in our thinking. We get along very well. It was so interesting when I was doing the due diligence on David. I've never seen, I do a lot of due diligence in my hedge fund, and I've never seen such universal, you know, congratulations and saying you've got to hire this guy. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary. There was one instance when I was at an MLB meeting, at the dinners that MLB's holding. I'm sitting at the bar, and two people come up to me and go, "You got to hire this guy," okay, unsolicited. And so, you know, I think that demonstrates how much respect David has in the industry, and I'm just so excited to have him on board, and you know, to bring on the next chapter of the Mets. So, I'm going to give it to David now.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. You know, it's felt like over the last couple of weeks we've been inching towards this day a little bit for me. So I'm certainly thrilled we're finally here, and I finally get to be here and get going. I want to start by thanking Steve and Alex. You know, throughout this process, really from the time we started talking, it became evident to me that not only do they have a real clear desire to win here, but they really understand that our franchise can impact our community. I think they understand that a sports franchise is not a normal business, and that we have the ability to affect millions of people's lives by how we operate. And so I'm thrilled to partner with them. I also want to thank Mark Adonasio and the entire Brewers organization. I spent 8 wonderful years in Milwaukee. I had a lot of fun. We had some success together. And I made relationships that are going to last my entire life. And I'm very thankful and grateful for that. I want to thank my friends and family, my wife, Whitney, our kids, Nora and Austin. It's meaningful for me. It's cool for me that our kids get to grow up Mets fans now, that we get to share that. that we get to live this journey together, and they get to experience a little bit of what I experienced as a kid growing up as well. At the top, I do want to touch on our managerial situation and the events of yesterday. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Buck, what he has accomplished globally throughout his career, and specifically what he's done in this town. I think as many of you know, up through yesterday, I was under contract with another team, and so I wasn't allowed to talk to Buck. I reached out to him this morning, and I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to connect. And I'm very appreciative of what he's meant to this organization, and I think unquestionably the organization is in a better spot for him having been here. As we move forward, I know there are going to be plenty of questions about my philosophies, what I'm aiming to bring here, how we're going to accomplish our goals, and certainly I'll answer all those to the best of my ability today and going forward. What I will say at the front end here is operationally, what we're going to try to do is build groups of really talented people at all levels of the organization. People who care deeply about each other, people who care deeply about the Mets, and people who are energized coming to work every single day and working with each other. I'm certain that many of those people are here already. And over time, I also think we'll have the opportunity to bring in other really talented people who want to join us. I also want to dispel any notion that there's any magic formula to this, that there are shortcuts or there's a secret sauce. There isn't. There aren't certainties in baseball. There are no guarantees of results. But I think we can guarantee that we're going to work really hard. I think we can guarantee that we're going to explore every single angle to make our team better. And I think we can guarantee an environment here for everyone associated with the Mets, our players, our staff, coaches, front office here and really around the world, an environment where they feel connected to the overarching mission of the organization and where they feel empowered to affect the direction of our organization. And it's been my experience and certainly my observation that when we do those things well, and when we focus on those types of things, that generally leads to success and results. I know how much this team means to our fans and our community. I grew up listening to Gary Cohen and Bob Murphy and Ed Coleman every summer. I've ridden the roller coaster of disappointment and hope, along with every other Mets fan. And I know I am here ultimately working for our fans, and I do not take that responsibility lightly. There are far too many people who have impacted my career for me to thank all of them here right now. I've had the privilege of working with and for some truly inspiring people. What I do want to do right now is call out a few folks with some Mets ties who helped me at the earliest stages of my career. Gary Perone and Howie Wolpoff, who were with the Brooklyn Cyclones, and gave me my first opportunity in pro ball, allowed me to have a really fun summer in Brooklyn. Adam Fisher, Craig Marino, John Ricco, Omar, gave me my first chance here with the Mets as an intern and taught me a lot about how this industry operates and how things work. Over the last couple of weeks, I've thought a lot about my first go-around with the Mets. I thought a lot about how much has changed. The owner, our stadium, much of the front office, and certainly all the players. But what hasn't changed is this organization's quest for truly sustainable competitiveness, and ultimately our first World Series championship since 1986. I'm here because I believe that's attainable. That is our goal. and I can assure you we will do everything we can to make it a reality. I'm thrilled to be here. This is my home. It's nice to be back, and I'm happy to take all of your questions. Thank you. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you, David. We'll start with Steve Gelbs.
Hey, David, congratulations. You mentioned it in the statement. You certainly touched on it a little bit here about growing up a Mets fan and how special this particular job is. Can you just describe a little bit more in detail what this organization has meant to you over the course of your life, and again how special the opportunity is to be the one in charge of leading it moving forward now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I grew up in baseball, and I think we all have different hobbies or pastimes or things that teach us different lessons in life. And for me, a lot of those lessons came through baseball, and frankly came through the Mets. And I spent a lot of time at Shea Stadium as a kid, with family, with friends. I snuck into the ballpark a few times. And so now I appreciate that they're letting me in here without a ticket. But, it's humbling that I get to sit here right now, that I get to be a part of leading this organization forward. And I know what this means to our fan base, and it's special for me.
And Steve, you've spoken for years now about not just hiring any president of baseball operations, but the right guy. And I know that you said you heard from people all across the industry that you've got to hire this guy. What in particular did you hear from people as to why he was the right guy?
Well, I mean, a number of things. I mean, it's universal that the people who worked under David loved working for him. So he really was able to establish followership wherever he was. People described him as incredibly smart, thoughtful, open to ideas, new ideas, inclusive, and so it sort of aligns with my thinking and what I like, how I like to run an organization. So, it seemed like a pretty good fit.
Tony?
This question is for Steve. I think there's been a perception around the game that David would be a good fit here for a long time. I'm curious when his name kind of first crossed your radar, and likewise for David, when did you see this as maybe a potential reality for you?
Well, I came into baseball 3 years ago, and, through conversations, there were probably 4 or 5 executives of David's ilk that, people talked about. Obviously, just because their names doesn't mean they're available, which meant I was going to stay patient. I was going to wait and make sure that, we got the right person as the head of president of baseball ops. And that's what I did. And, things have to align. People have to be available. And so this was the opportunity. And so everything kind of came together.
In terms of when did I think?
Just when did you see this as, something that could potentially happen for you? Even if just a pipe dream.
Yeah, when I got off the phone with Steve after we agreed to a deal, look, I've been around this sport long enough, and I've worked on deals long enough to know that until you have a deal, you don't have a deal, and things can change. So I tried to stay pretty balanced and not get ahead of myself. When Steve and I first had a chance to meet in mid-August, that's the first time where I really thought, wow, this could be a fit, and this could work. And so really from that point forward, it was at the forefront of my mind.
Bruce?
David, welcome. Sustainable competitiveness. When does that begin? 2024, 2025, or beyond?
Our goal is to begin that now. We are going to put together and do our best to put together a team in 2024 that is competitive. And we're going to do it in a way that does not detract from our competitiveness in the future years. That's a needle to thread, but that's our goal, and that should be our goal. We're in the biggest market in the country. We have plenty of resources, and so we're going to aim to put together a competitive club next year that our fans can be excited about, and ensure that we're doing it in a manner and in a way that doesn't detract from those future years.
John on the left.
Yes, congratulations to David.
Thanks, John.
I'm tempted to ask you how to sneak into a ballpark because I've never been able to do it. But
tougher to do it now than in 1998.
I would think. But just since I have one question, I want to ask you about Pete Alonso. Obviously, he's a homegrown star, one of the two biggest stars on this team, along with Lindor. He's got a year to go before he's a free agent. How do you view the situation with Alonso? And is the fact that he's homegrown or the fact that he is good in the clubhouse, does any of that weigh into it, or is it all about how good a player he is?
No, I think the entire package weighs into it. So Pete is a great player. He is also good in the clubhouse, and he is also homegrown. All of that matters. I know over the summer there was some trade speculation, and look, I'll just say, like, I expect Pete to be the opening day first baseman next year. Pete's an important member of this team. He's an important member of this organization, and I think we're really fortunate to have him.
Mike Puma
Steve, over here.
on the right.
How you doing? You'd kind of hinted all along that Billy was going to stay as the GM. Was that built in to the deal with David, or did David have autonomy on that, and how is that different than picking the manager?
Well, I mean, you know, it's my goal to build up the management talent in this organization. I mean, baseball operations is pretty complicated. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. And, you know, I mean, building a strong management team is paramount to me. And so I viewed it as, you know, 1 and 1 equals, you know, 3. Okay.
Tim Healy.
Question for Steve. In the years before and the years since you bought the team, there's been a lot of turnover at the head of baseball operations, at manager. Why do you believe, and why should fans believe, that David and the manager to come are going to be the duo that sort of puts an end to that pattern?
Well, you know, I mean, you know, when I'll say it again, you know, when a head of baseball ops comes in, he's entitled to pick his person, and the goal would be to align philosophies, and you would expect that. And so, you know, there's no guarantees, right? But I expect David to be here for a long time, and I would hope we'd pick a manager who's aligned in that way also.
Bill Ladson.
Congratulations, David. I spoke to Omar Minaya this morning, and he said that you worked at the scouting department with Sandy Johnson. I'd like to know, what did you learn from Sandy and Omar, and do you take some of that philosophy from them to the current Mets?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've tried to take philosophies from every one of my stops in baseball. One of the things I've noticed throughout my stops is that every leader I've worked for did things a little bit differently, and they all found success in different ways. And so different skill sets can get you there. And certainly the subjective evaluation component of our game is really important and remains important, and will continue to be important. You know, our goal here is to have the best in class, to use a phrase that I know Steve uses regularly, across our organization, both on the objective and subjective sides of the game. I think we can do that, and I'm looking forward to meeting our staff that's already here and then moving forward with them.
Joel Sherman on the left.
Steve, for you, I realize it's a long, winding road from 3 years ago to today. I'm wondering from
sort of dog years.
Yeah. Okay. But from the moment that David announced last year that he wasn't going to stay running baseball operations with the Brewers, did you at that point stop looking for someone else, thinking this was your man? And can you take us through that chronology? If not, have you talked to other people? Who were they, etc.?
Well, listen, I mean, Dave and I first met in August, right? So while he seemed like a reasonably good candidate, until you actually meet somebody and get to know them, it's impossible to know whether he's the guy. And so, I mean, it's also a question of did we get along? Did we share similar philosophies? And all that was to be determined. So it was my goal eventually, obviously at some point to fill this position. But you never know if it was going to be David or somebody else until you actually get in a room with somebody and, have these conversations and flesh out, philosophies.
Had you talked to anyone else or investigated anyone else in the last year?
That's a good question. I no serious discussions with anybody.
Abby on the right.
Hi, David. You stepped down last year from this same role. I just want to know why it was the right time for you to step down last year and why it's now the right time for you to step into this role and the right team for you with this role now.
Yeah, when I stepped down last year, it was really with the intentions that I laid out at that time. I was ready to take a step back. I was ready to spend more time with my family. And I needed some space to reflect on sort of where I was from a career perspective, what had gone well, what hadn't gone well. And it's really tough to do all of that when you're in the moment and the day-to-day and the intensity that these jobs require. And at that point, I wasn't sure that I was going to jump back into this seat. And it needed to be a pretty special opportunity. It needed to be the right place, not only for me, but for my family. And this is probably one of the few, if not the only, opportunity that would have allowed me to do that.
Tim Britton on the left.
For David, going off an earlier question about turnover, there are a lot of people in this organization hired by different front office regimes. How do you go about creating kind of that philosophical alignment between all of them, the people you bring in, and how long does that process take?
Yeah, look, I view the fact that there are people from multiple regimes here as a feature, not a bug. That's a good thing for us. We've got different perspectives. We've come from different training. And as long as we respect that about each other, and we understand that different segments of our organization are going to view the problems we face a little bit differently, that's a really good thing. So I'm excited about that, and I think that's going to make us better.
And then, given your contractual situation, how much were you able to familiarize yourself with this organization in the last couple weeks? Not
a ton. Today's day one, so I've got plenty of work to do, beginning right when we get out of here.
Dave on the right.
Steve, you've spent historic amounts of money to get the Mets to where you wanted them to get to. It didn't work on that plan. During the deadline, you talked about maybe shifting that philosophy. How is that going to look going forward? The expenditure and the financial resources you're going to put into the payroll for next year? And how does David, coming from Milwaukee, who is not used to operating in that fashion, how is that going to work between the way he operated in Milwaukee and how you spend money?
I mean, all that's TBD. And we try to keep the conversations on a philosophical level rather than getting into the details. And so all that needs to be figured out. One thing, it's clear, at least especially this year, we're not the only team that spent a decent amount of money and maybe didn't work out the way we had hoped it would work out. And so it's really about finding the best ball players, putting together the best team we can, and cost is, not necessarily the determinant of success or not.
I mean, do you expect to be spending at the top end baseball again, Steve, as far as that goes?
The answer is, we're going to be competitive, and but I'm not going to get out in front of that decision. I've got a new person here who's going to help me think about things, and I look forward to having those conversations.
And along those same lines, David, how do you look at payroll and investing in a team as far as building a winner? As Steve said, many teams did that, and it didn't work out for them this year.
Yeah, so having resources is an advantage, right? I don't want to confuse correlation with causation, where you spend. It's not the case that you spend money and therefore you're going to lose. But look, we have the resources to compete at the top end of free agency. Steve's proven that. That's an advantage for us, and at the appropriate times, we're going to use that advantage. But it has to be at the appropriate times, and it has to be for the right players. And that may surface this offseason, or it may not. There are going to be off seasons where the top of the free agent market makes sense, and there are going to be off seasons where it doesn't, and we're going to have to evaluate them each offseason in the construct of where we are as an organization, what our team looks like, and go from there. But look, I'm excited that we have the resources we do. We're going to do everything we can to use them to the best of our ability, while recognizing that the goal here is sustainable success. And as long as we can use our resources to help us do that, that's wonderful.
Will on the left.
Hey, David, when you took over in Milwaukee, you made a bunch of transactions that first offseason. Just from an evaluation standpoint, what could you learn or take away from that experience that you can apply to this one, considering the amount of roster decisions that are ahead of you?
What can I learn from the Milwaukee experience?
Just that first offseason.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful that I've gone through it once before, and I understand the volume of information that's going to be coming at me really quickly here, the number of people I have to meet, and the baseball calendar doesn't wait for anyone. So before we know it, the World Series is going to be over, and we're going to have to start making decisions. So, yeah, I think the fact that I've gone through it once before helps me here, and I probably have a little bit better understanding of what the path for me needs to be over the next 4 weeks to get up to speed.
What will you be prioritizing in a manager?
In a manager? Look, I view the managerial position as one of true partnership. Someone who is working side by side with me and the rest of our baseball ops group. And the manager has so many responsibilities these days that it is a big job. But first and foremost is the ability to manage people, manage personalities, and create and facilitate an organizational culture where people enjoy coming to work and work hard. And so that's at the top of my list.
We'll do a few more questions over here on the right, Mike.
David, congratulations and welcome. In Milwaukee, you built a reputation. You were able to build a very strong pitching staff, partly by finding some pitching in maybe places that other teams weren't looking. Do you view pitching as the first priority here, and how are you able to do? Can you do it similarly here, the way you did it in Milwaukee?
So from a prioritization standpoint, I don't know. I need to get under the hood a little bit, talk with our group, understand internally here, what we think we do well and where we think there are areas for improvement. I'm looking forward to doing that. And can you do what the Brewers have done here in New York? I think we can develop good starting pitching here, absolutely, but it's going to look different than the way Milwaukee has done it. It has to. No two organizations are the same. The personnel in two organizations aren't the same. The Brewers have done it in a certain way, and it doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to follow that exact blueprint. We have to create our own blueprint here, and I think we will.
Two more, one from Disha on the left.
Hi, David. What is your relationship with Billy, and sort of what went into that decision to keep him on leading this front office with you?
Yeah, so Billy and I have had, I think, a really nice relationship going back years as competitors. Talking to each other, whether it's about transactions or just about industry events. I have a lot of respect for the experience he has in this game, the experience he has in New York, and I'm looking forward to working with him.
And lastly, Mark on the left.
Hey, David, congrats. Just following up on the manager, is there someone that you have in mind, or kind of how wide will you cast that net?
No, there's no one I have in mind. We are going to cast a wide net. We're going to have a real process. We're going to, at some point, interview candidates of varying backgrounds. And I imagine we'll interview candidates who have both been major league managers before and those who have not. So the point here is finding the right person who we believe can grow with the organization and hopefully be here for a long time.
Thank you very much. At this point, we're going to do a photo opportunity with Steve, David, and Whitney. If you come up with the riders, please assemble to the right. Following the photo opportunity, we'll have the
David
TV
Stearns
stations
alongside Steve Cohen. David introduced as the new president of baseball operations for the New York Mets. Again, this is a new role that he is taking over out at Citi Field as we welcome you back inside our SNY studios. By the way, we're going to head back out just a little bit. Steve Gelbs going to be joined by David Stearns and others. But let's begin big picture here, and I'll start with you on this, Andy. What was your takeaway from what you heard from David Stearns?
Well, guys, the digging that I've been doing on David Stearns from the reporting side over the past few weeks has been, we know this guy has a high IQ. We know he's Harvard educated. How's his EQ? How does he relate to people? How does that feel? That is so important to have an edge in the game when everybody has all the analytical information. And we heard, the proof will be in the pudding, of course, but we heard some things that I thought were encouraging. When he said there was no secret sauce to winning, that's actually something that in the post-Moneyball years, owners did think there was a secret sauce to winning, and it was analytics and it was on-base percentage or whatever was cool at that time. And it's nice to see the humility from someone of Stearns' background to say there's no secret sauce. And that was also in evidence in the question that he was asked about Omar Minaya, who he name-checked, who's a real mentor of his. He was asked about scouting, and he said that subjective scouting part of the game is really important. We're in an age now, guys, where analytics are just a given in the game. And as I said, the edge is in that human touch, and we saw a little bit of that, I thought, in the first impression today.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think the human touch, he seemed very comfortable. He seemed very relaxed. I don't think this is something that, I think there was more thought to whether or not he was going to want to be in this role, but we're going to go back out and hear a little bit more, and we can talk about it later.
One of the things he did say is, I've ridden the roller coaster of disappointment and hope like every Mets fan. He grew up a Mets fan here in New York City. Let's go back out to the ballpark right now. There's Steve Gelbs with David Stearns. Take it away, Steve.
Yeah, Gary, thanks so much. And you said it. I mean, he grew up not just a Mets fan, but as you can tell, a diehard Mets fan. And David, once again, congratulations. Was there a moment where it did hit you on a deeper level that, again, now you were that rare fan that gets to actually be the one running the franchise that you love?
Yeah, I think when the news leaked a couple of weeks ago, when it became public, and just the amount of outreach I got from friends and family here in New York, people who were so excited for me, but also for the Mets. And so I think that's when this really began to hit me that this is happening. I'm going home, and I get to help lead the New York Mets.
All right, so you let it rip that you snuck in to Shea Stadium back in the day. Who was your guy? Who was the player? What was the team that you really fell in love with when you were growing up?
So obviously, early mid '90s, we tried, but there wasn't a whole lot to cheer about. The late '90s Mets were really my teams, and I remember the Piazza trade. I was here, or I was at Shea for his first game as a Met. And going through those 98, 99, 2000 seasons, the 2001 season, and what that September meant to the city, and some of the games at Shea during that period. I think those were the teams that solidified the Mets and me, and I remember a lot of those games and moments at Shea with my family and friends during those runs.
So you're saying Todd Zeile. Todd Zeile is the guy,
There
right?
you go. Absolutely. Todd Zeile, no question. But there were those teams. We think about like the 99, 2000 teams, and the different components of those teams, the different players who contributed in each year. And that is something I actually take with me as I think about building rosters. And you realize that the team that you think is going to be the team outside of spring training or opening day isn't always the team that helps you win games in September. And I think both of those teams proved that. Both those teams had players who emerged mid-season who ended up playing very key parts in what were very successful years.
When you talk about your team building philosophy, you're obviously someone that knows the New York market is different, right? And there's more scrutiny, whether it's the media, whether it's the fan base. How much, when you're evaluating players, thinking about the guys to bring in, do you think about not just the skill set, but the mental toughness to deal with, inevitable differences here than you would have to deal with in other places?
Yeah, this is a different market. It's a different animal, and players who play here will tell you that. And clearly, some players can handle that a little bit better than others. Players who haven't played here before, it can be a little tougher to tell, and you do your best to figure out whether they've had success in other big markets, whether they seem to have performed well in other high-intensity, high-pressure environments. But you'll never know. And certainly a lot of really talented players have come here, and it's taken a year or so to make that adjustment. We've all seen that on both sides of the river here. So, I understand that. It's something that we're going to have to take into account. It's also something we're not going to get right all the time.
We hear the word or the phrase sustained success constantly. You brought it up a couple of times. Steve has talked about that since day one of taking over this franchise. What are the keys to doing that? How do you go about? I know it's not, there's no perfect formula, but what are the main tenets of building a sustainable franchise? So
clearly the foundation is we have to produce our own talent pipeline consistently. We can't build a team exclusively through free agency. It's really tough to do that and have success, regardless of the resources you have. And you really can't do it even predominantly through free agency. So we will have to develop a system here, and it goes back to our scouting department and bringing in players, and then our coaches in the minor leagues developing those players to the best of our ability. That consistently replenishes our major league team. We are fortunate we have the ability to supplement that group, and when appropriate, we can supplement it in a really aggressive manner. But the foundation for any successful organization starts in what you're bringing in and developing yourself.
So, in the conversations you've had with Steve Cohen, he's made it clear to all of us that next year won't necessarily be about strictly winning a World Series again. It's about, again, building for the future and still being competitive. How do you, as now the head of baseball operations, balance that long-term goal with still trying to put a product on the field next year that has an opportunity to be successful?
Yeah, so those are the key and difficult decisions that we're always going to face. And you face those decisions, frankly, regardless of the market you're in, where you're trying to balance near-term, long-term. It probably becomes a little bit more acute here in New York, where there are the expectations to compete every single year. And we should be able to meet those expectations. Those are reasonable expectations for our fans to have of us. I have those expectations of us. And so there is no magic formula. You do your best to evaluate every decision in terms of how it is going to impact us in 24 while not hamstringing us in the future. Because we know if we make ill-advised decisions that exclusively prioritize 24, we're going to pay for that down the road, and it's going to set the franchise back in ways we don't want.
David, you've talked about the wide net that you plan on casting when it comes to choosing the next manager. Do you have a timetable in mind? Is there a moment in the offseason where you say we really, if not need to have a manager in place, we want to, because of presenting a full package to free agents, let's say, moving forward?
Yeah, there's not a moment. I'm confident that by the time we get into those types of discussions in December, for example, we'll know who our manager is going to be. But there's no defined moment. What's important for us is that we run a process that nets us the right person. That's what I'm concerned about. If that is a short process, that's wonderful. And if it takes us longer, I'm fine with that too.
Finally, David, what is the process now for you of learning the inner workings of this organization, going under the hood, as you put it, and how does this structure now work with you, with Billy Epler, who's been here, and everybody who's been at the top of this baseball operations department for a year or two now?
Yeah, so step one is I need to start meeting with people, and that's going to happen as soon as I go upstairs, and meeting meeting as groups, meeting as departments, meeting one-on-one, face-to-face, so that I can really understand who we have and what we do well, and where perhaps I can bring in some of my experience from elsewhere and my skill sets to help move us forward. So the first couple of weeks in these things are a lot of discussion, a lot of meeting, and then beginning to slowly really prepare for an off-season, which is going to begin the minute the World Series ends.
David Stearns, congratulations on achieving a lifelong dream, and we look forward to many more conversations in the future.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, guys. Noted Todd Zeile fan, David Stearns, now running the Mets.
There we
Back to
go,
you.
Steve. Like that a lot. Thank you so much, David, as well. How about that, Todd, the impact that you had? He really grew up with those teams in the late 90s, and then your World Series team went to the World Series in 2000.
It's funny and flattering, but I think there was a takeaway from that, though, for me, is that oftentimes you have the guys that are analytically driven. He's an Ivy League guy. He's obviously a brilliant guy when it comes to baseball by the numbers, but you can also tell that he's a real fan of the game. He understands the game. Even the talking about sneaking in, watching baseball. A lot of the guys that are trying to get into the game through the sort of analytics path and the Ivy League path haven't necessarily had that real baseball background that he seems to already have instilled in him, as well as the fact that he recognized, even in listening to him talk about those 98, 99, 2000, 2001 teams, the fact that you can build a team that you think is going to win and that you still have to make moves along the way that are not necessarily insignificant pieces, even though they're not going to be the big headline-grabbing pieces that have an impact on the outcome of the season. So I liked hearing some of those nuanced pieces of his knowledge of the game. And obviously, as I said before, I thought it was interesting how comfortable he seems. He seems sincere, and Andy mentioned the word humility. It seems like, yeah, this is a lifelong dream, but he's very confident in his abilities, and I think has a very, much of an ease about him already while he walks into this position.
Yeah, you know what, Todd, where you were noting the whole fandom piece, whether it was sneaking into the stadium or whether it was liking your Mets teams, which are very compelling teams that a lot of people could fall in love with, and now he's part of that, which is cool that now he gets to run the team. I ran out and did some research and had something typed up about something that a Harvard sports writer for the Harvard Crimson named David Stearns wrote in 2005. This is a real article by David Stearns, a sports writer. I want to read this quote. "Baseball plays a cruel trick on those of us who are captured by it before we even had the chance to resist. It takes hold of us, a mystical, unrelenting force that someone outside the baseball cult couldn't possibly understand. From the time of your first game, from the time you can put on a cap, by the time you know what 643 actually means, it's got you." So, look, there's heart there.
No question about that. He's been a lifelong fan of the game. I thought it was compelling to hear him say, you can't build sustainability when it comes to success with a baseball franchise only through free agency. You've got to bring guys in and build from the bottom up. I do want to ask you, Todd, because he hit on a bunch of different things, including where the managerial candidates are going to come from. Said he's going to cast a very wide net there. We know his former manager in Milwaukee, Craig Counsell, somebody whose contract comes up at the end of this year, and that name has been out there. So when you think about the next manager for the New York Mets, do you think qualities need to be different than the one we have seen over the last couple of years?
Well, that's a really challenging question because the qualities of Buck Showalter, he's as smart a baseball man as there has been in the game in a generation or more. And he's a guy that also knows New York, which I think is a critical piece to a managerial search. It's somebody that has to know New York. And having been a part of this as a player and now in the media side of things, you recognize that it is different here. I was with 11 organizations. It's different here, whether you like to admit it or not. It is different here. And so that's going to have to be something that's taken into consideration. But look, Buck Showalter, and he said it in the onset, is a great baseball man. He's got great respect for him. And, but at the same time, he's coming in here with an opportunity to make his own mark on this organization, an organization that he grew up loving and cheering for. And so he's going to cast that wide net. I do believe that he will do that. And he's going to find the guy that he thinks fits not only with the Mets winning, trajectory, but also with his own philosophies in the game, so that is somebody that he can communicate with and have comfort with as a guy that he knows. And it's going to be a balance. He's definitely a guy that's a balanced, analytical guy, but it's going to be somebody that he has a comfort with in being able to impart some of their philosophy, his philosophy as an organizational philosophy that leads down to the guys making the decision on the field.
There's got to be alignment, is what you're saying, from the top down to the field. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, just to drill down a little further, Todd, you used the phrase wide net. Stearns used the phrase wide net. Once again, on Andy's Arts and Crafts Day, I made something that uses the phrase wide net, and I wanted to lead with that.
You were first, Andy. Yeah.
I was first with wide net. We made this at about 10 o'clock this morning. But talk about alignment. Clearly, that is the reality here of how they're looking at it, and the reason that wide net is to the far left of that graphic is because he's the leading candidate right now. I want that to be clear, and the reason I'm making a point of that is there's a couple people on this board, the first three, that have been widely speculated. Beltran for years, Eric Chavez since Billy Epler's really helped advance him and had that great relationship with him over the course of two organizations, and Craig Counsell, who people in New York won't stop talking about. What I understand is that while Counsell certainly could become in the mix if that broke right with what the Brewers are doing, is that he's received more coverage than is merited so far relative to his chances of running this team. I'm not saying it's not happening, but it's a really complicated situation. He will be a free agent, but the Brewers are in the postseason, and there's a lot of things would have to fall into place. Beltran and Chavez are two guys. It's going to be a wide net, a big list. You remember Brodie Van Wagenen did this too. There was a huge whiteboard in the Mets offices with name after name after name, and it's going to be like that. And a lot of names are going to get out. I can tell you right now there is no leader in the clubhouse. There's no early front runner. What I'm hearing is exactly how Stearns presented it. Wide net is the current front runner for this job.
It is worth noting here, and one of the first things he spoke about, David Stearns, when he took the dais, was the fact that he said he could not have spoken to Buck Showalter because he was under contract until today, and the first thing he did this morning was reach out to Buck. He said they haven't spoken yet, but he did reach out to him to speak to him.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Gary, because it's pretty significant that on what was supposed to be the Mets' big joyous day of introducing Stearns, they did have to lead with some cleanup on the Showalter situation. It's really tough when you let go a borderline Hall of Fame manager. Obviously, the timing and the mechanics of it are very awkward, so it was good of them to circle back and be complimentary to Buck. I'm sure that's cold comfort to Buck, who is a borderline Hall of Fame manager who's out of a job. But this was, we're not going to ignore, of course, and we're not ignoring right now. This is the big Mets story of the morning, and the back pages and whatnot was how that didn't go down exactly cleanly. So it's good that they cleaned it up.
One of the other things David Stearns spoke about was growing up as a fan of the New York Mets. The fact that he listened to Gary Cohen, and he listened to Bob Murphy, and he listened to Ed Coleman. So let's go back out to the ballpark right now. Steve Gelbs once again, and there he is with Gary Cohen. Fellas.
Yeah, Gary, I think that's the perfect way for me to start this conversation with the great Gary Cohen, is how old did it make you feel that the guy running the Mets now grew up listening to you?
Yeah, it definitely struck me. I listened to Lindsey, Ralph, and Bob growing up, and I certainly would have talked about them at my introductory press conference if I had had one, but to have David Stearns mention me as, one of his childhood memories regarding the Mets, it's a little humbling, but also, it makes me look at my Medicare card.
Gary, we've talked about this all the time with you, that you grew up in the upper deck, and this was a dream once you realized that you weren't going to be the shortstop. Just on a human level, is there something when you look at David Stearns that you can connect to emotionally to understand what he's probably going through right now?
Sure. I mean, I never aspired to be the president of baseball operations of the Mets. I wouldn't have aspired to it then, and I certainly wouldn't now. But, there's something about coming to your childhood team. And it's great that David had the experience working for several other organizations, but there's nothing like being a part of the fabric of the team that you grew up rooting for. I think that it brings a different perspective in terms of who the fans are and what they expect. I don't know that it gives you any other leg up in terms of the performance of your job, but I think it helps you in terms of your communication skills and the way that you relate to the fan base and their expectations, the fact that David had this experience himself.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's important anywhere, but certainly in New York and certainly with this franchise. Aside from that, what was your main takeaway from what you heard in that press conference?
Well, I think the fact that he's really starting from day one. This is not I don't think he arrives with any preconceived notions of what needs to be done here. And, you know, that means that he's got a lot of work to do in a short period of time. I think it'll take a while for him to figure out within the organizational structure who needs to stay and who needs to go and where he needs to add. But I think from an operational standpoint, in terms of the deals that need to be made, first to hire a manager, then to figure out what free agents to pursue, what trades to pursue, who within the organization needs to be signed long-term, all those things. It's going to take a few weeks and months to really get up to speed, and he's going to have to put it on fast forward.
So the first major decision, obviously, will be who the next manager is. And David Stearns made it very clear there's no leader in the clubhouse right now. He's going to cast a wide net, do his due diligence. Is there, in your mind, I don't want to ask a guy that you think is perfect for the job, but when you look at characteristics, is there a certain type of manager that you think this particular group needs moving forward?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I mean, you know, you go from Buck, who was such a meticulous manager in terms of his preparation and attention to detail and knowing his players on a granular level. I think you need somebody like that, but I think probably you want that. You want to be able to thread that needle between somebody who is a little younger, who's a little closer to the players in terms of age, but also who has big league experience. And there really aren't that many people in that basket. And, you know, David Stearns will have to figure out what works for him. But in terms of finding the right guy for the job, I wish him luck. It's not going to be an easy task.
Now, in terms of the on-field product next year moving forward, listen, the organization did an entire 180 at the trade deadline this year. With the infusion of top-end prospects that are in the system now, with a guy like David Stearns now heading up baseball operations, where do you feel this organization is? How do you feel about the state of the franchise, not just for next year, but the sustained success they hope to gather?
Well, certainly the money they spent to pick up the contracts for guys like Scherzer and Verlander, et cetera, allowed them to bring in organizational talent that will certainly bear fruit over the next few years. And I think in terms of the position player component of this team, I think that there's really not that much that needs to be done. You've got a really good core with Nimmo and Alonso and McNeil and Lindor. You've got exciting young players coming up through the system, and you've got good complementary players. Certainly Alvarez has won the job of being the catcher going forward, but also you have depth at that position below. The number of middle of the field prospects that they brought back and that are coming through the system is exciting. So I think they're okay from that standpoint, but the pitching obviously needs to be figured out. You have two starters going into next year who are solid in Senga and Quintana, and the rest of the rotation is really in flux, and I think you look forward to Diaz coming back to head the bullpen, but other than that, the bullpen is completely in flux. You have two older pitchers who should be back next year in Ottavino and Raley, I'm assuming, although Ottavino was a little bit less sure about picking up his player option
than he was earlier in the season.
But regardless, whether those guys are back or not, I think there's a lot to be done in terms of putting the pitching together. And I think that there are a lot of things that went wrong for this team this year, but the lack of pitching and pitching length early in the season that put pressure on the bullpen, which was already shorthanded, that was the thing that really led to this team's downfall.
So when you talked about the core of position players, you mentioned Pete Alonso. Right. And, that has been something that's been hanging over this team, this organization, this fan base for the last few months. Right. And David Stearns addressed it while making no proclamations about any sort of long-term extension. He did say, I fully expect Pete Alonso to be the opening day first baseman next year. What did you make of the way he addressed that situation?
Well, it means he's leaving his options open. It doesn't mean that Pete won't be traded, but I don't think he will be. At the same time, I know that there are going to be negotiations at some level about a long-term deal, and then it comes down to a question of years and dollars and whether they can hammer that out. And, if there comes a time when David feels that they're at an impasse, maybe he changes his mind about whether Pete gets dealt, whether it's during the winter or at the trading deadline next year. But I think if you're David Stearns, you go into this with the notion that you want to get a deal done with Pete Alonso to keep him a Met for the long term. I think that's in the best interests of the organization. I think it's in the best interests of Pete. It's all a matter of what the cost and the years are going to be.
Gary, what are we doing tomorrow?
Well, you're getting ready for your next Jets game, and I am going to be playing with a basset hound.
All right, so Gary and I will get together then on Wednesday. Tomorrow we will take the day off. He's Gary Cohen. I'm Steve Gelbs. That'll do it from us out here. Gary, back to you in the studio.
All right, Steve and Gary, we thank you both. Gary's going to be playing with a basset hound tomorrow. How great is that? He and Lynn will get some time.
It's the moment they've been waiting for.
Yes, indeed. Get some time to catch up, get to know each other once again after a long baseball season. I do want to follow up. They were talking about Pete Alonso right there. And again, David Stearns did say he expects Pete to be the opening day first baseman next year. As Gary said right there, this can take a number of different roads as we move forward. But on the priority list, Todd, where do you think getting something solidified with Pete stacks up at the moment?
I think it's probably 2 or 3. And when I say that, I think manager is going to be number 1. He's got a lot of things to do when it comes to knowing the organization, meeting all the people. And I sincerely believe in everything he says, that he wants to know who the people are that run the organization and wants to see it on both sides. But I also think starting pitching is going to be a priority at some point. And so that might be sort of on the same level as Pete. But I do think that was a very diplomatic and smart way to answer that question. He also had praise for Pete as a guy that's important to the organization, important to the city of New York, and I believe that those things are true as well. I mean, you're not going to go out and find another guy that can hit 45 and drive in 120 every year, so there has to be a serious consideration to try to bring Pete back here to be a part of this Mets team for the long haul. But you know what? Some of those factors are unknowns right now. He's not had an opportunity to speak with Pete, see what they want, see what his agents and those people are trying to lobby for Pete in the long term. So I think it's a priority. Do I think it's going to get done? I don't think there's an absolute in that. I do believe that he is sincere when he says he's going to be the starting first baseman next year, but that leaves some options open.
And by the way, not just a guy who puts up the sort of numbers that you talk about right there, but a guy who puts up those numbers and is a homegrown product, Andy.
Well, it's those intangibles. Look, I still don't think this is anywhere really close to high on the priority list right now, simply because Pete Alonso's on the team next year. So you deal with one thing at a time. And we've talked about this before on our air, but Steve Cohen's completely comfortable with letting his stars go to free agency. Edwin Diaz, Brandon Nimmo, Jacob deGrom. And if it's going to be a fit, sign him as a free agent. If it's not going to be a fit like with deGrom, let him go somewhere else. So there's no urgency in this organization to settle the long term. And there's an awareness from smart baseball people that signing a slugging first baseman to a second-generation contract in his late 20s that'll take him deep into his 30s, from a pure baseball standpoint, is not a good contract, not a good move. The next Pete Alonso contract will not be evaluated in the most literal way as a good contract. Then you come in with the intangibles that Todd was mentioning, though. You come up with the homegrown, the popularity, the fact that there really is elite power. So there's a lot of ingredients in the stew there to think about if you want to go there again over the next decade or so. And frankly, Stearns doesn't have to think about this until almost 12 months from now. And I don't expect that he will have to or turn his mind to it in a very serious way for quite a while, because why do it? There's a 2024 2024 team to plan for, and Pete's not a question with that.
And then there's a guy by the name of Shohei Ohtani, who's going to be the biggest free agent on the market. And as David Stearns said, and as Steve Cohen has said so many times in the past, and we know this, they've got the resources to go out and make any move that they really want to make here. So when it comes to Shohei Ohtani, and they talk about being competitive in 2024, but doing it in the right manner, do you believe, Andy, the Mets are going to be in on Shohei Ohtani?
Oh, my goodness, yes. This is going to be a whole thing. And there's two different ways to look at free agency where the Mets are at. You probably don't go for Blake Snell or Matt Chapman or normal great players who are free agents right now. That's not necessarily where the Mets are at. But Shohei Ohtani is a perfect fit for an owner that buys Picassos. This is just an all-time aesthetic thrill, Shohei Ohtani, not to mention a marketing and financial thrill, not to mention some kind of great player going forward. We don't know where he's going to be as a pitcher going forward, but he is the world's most expensive Giacometti equivalent in a baseball player, which Steve Cohen once bought. So that's why I think he doesn't count when we say the Mets aren't all in on high-end free agents this year. There's the rest of humanity, and there's Shohei Ohtani, and the Mets are going to see if they can do anything there.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Why wouldn't they? I mean,
Exactly.
to that point, and why wouldn't anybody try to be in on Shohei Ohtani? I mean, that's a no-brainer. However, I think there is going to be some interesting negotiations in that. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a matter of money for this organization. It's going to be a matter of whether or not they think he's going to be a guy that wants to come and play in New York, because he's so often at least said or inferred that he likes the West Coast. And so that may be the biggest deterrent. It may not be money. It may not be the fact that that Steve Cohen has the resources and they want to bring him here and that they're trying to build a winner. It may be just simply whether or not Shohei Ohtani wants to leave Southern California or somewhere on the West Coast, because he's inferred at least that he's comfortable out there. So it might take a little more to get him out here, Gary. I'm a California guy. I like it out here in New York.
Understand.
In case you're listening.
But SNY stepped up, and here you are.
Yeah, here I am.
There we go. That's how it works. And there's no question Steve's going to open the checkbook for Shohei Ohtani if he wants to come here. One would think.
It's
and
a big
again,
if.
yes, it's a big if. And again, starting pitching is going to be a very big thing this offseason. We're going to talk about that a lot once we get into the hot stove season. And so that's going to wrap up our coverage, the special coverage of the introduction of David Stearns out at Citi Field. Much more on this coming up tonight. Evan and Tiki at 4 o'clock, then baseball night in New York at 6, and then Honda Sports Night tonight at 11 o'clock. So for now, for Todd Zeal and Andy Martino, I'm Gary Apple. We thank you for joining us. We say so long for right now from Studio 41. Take care.